Well, after I had been working with the IRBs for about 4 or 5 years, um, the AIDS epidemic was kind of swelling up. I had known lots of people in New York who had died from AIDS. It was in New York, it was very omnipresent. It was everywhere. And I thought, I used to read things like the New York Native, and FDA was always very roundly criticized. Everybody thought FDA was holding up or not developing drugs or holding up access to drugs, when in fact FDA doesn't do drug development. Um, Basically, people at FDA were working toward getting drugs on the market, but there was no basic science at that point, and there really wasn't a target, and things weren't very focused. So I had suggested to somebody at FDA that we needed to have some somebody who would explain what FDA really does, rather than just sitting there and taking the arrows. And at one point, actually after the 1988 AIDS activist demonstration had closed the agency down for a day, there was an Office of AIDS Coordination, an AIDS coordination staff that developed to just sort of coordinate things between different parts of the agency on HIV-related activities, AIDS-related activities at that time. And then in 1994, it expanded to an office. And I applied for the job to working with the HIV community because I felt like I was already part of that community in a way. Um, and I didn't know what I was getting in for either. So that was another reason I applied for it. But I worked with a friend in New York, in the New York Regional Laboratory, who had died from AIDS. And I remember working in the lab with him when he was sick and saying, gee, I wish there was something that I could do, he as working at FDA, that would help other people who were dealing with this. And but he couldn't think of anything. And particularly where we were in the lab, there really was no outlet to really do something creative or constructive. So when this job came up, I thought, well, I could do this for him, you know, and so took the job. And boy, believe me, when I took that job, FDA was getting clobbered by activists, and there was a lot of animosity toward the agency, and people would call up, and you'd get very abusive telephone calls, and it was kind of a very difficult thing. But I think, you're dealing with people who, if you read And the Band Played On, you really see how nobody was paying attention to it. People were dying at amazing rates, and it wasn't pretty at all. And I think, well, I can understand these people. So I would spend a lot of time on the phone with everybody who'd call me up, and I would say, this is what FDA does, this is what NIH does, this is what drug companies are doing, this is, what everybody's trying to do, here are the problems. Um, Little by little, people often think that the AIDS activists changed the face of AIDS, and I think to a really tremendous level they did. But a lot of those things were already in play, and I think it was the science together with the activism, together with the administrative things that had to take place. All of it had to work together. And I think the really credible thing, to the credit of these activists, is what they did was start to learn how all those pieces worked. And they started to work at all the pieces. So you'd go to an AIDS conference, and they'd be all over the place, and they'd be talking to the people who did the research, and they'd be talking to the people who ran the companies, and they'd be talking to the people who did the insurance reimbursement. And they would start pushing everybody to start working a lot more closely to make the system work, because there were so many system problems. And I still think, when I talk to patient advocates today, I say, it's just coming to FDA is not going to solve the problem. You need to talk to all the moving parts and get everybody working together with you, because you need to know what their limitations are. You need to know what the regulatory framework and limitations in the statutes are that FDA has. People thought we had unlimited ability to tell companies to do anything that we wanted. And I'd say, but the FDA is sued all the time. by outside groups and companies, and we have very little, much less authority than people think as a government agency. You know, it's not a government where the government can tell anybody exactly what to do. And I think that's an issue now where people with expanded access want FDA to make these companies make these drugs available. And you have to say, well, the drug belongs to them. Do you live in a society where if you own it, you control it?